everybody, welcome back to another episode of Intentional Improvement. I am your host, Erica Lamar. So I have somebody here with me today who has done something astounding. It's actually a task that most people would never venture towards. He is the executive director and founder of a high-performing charter school here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Initially coming from a very small town, and when I say small, I say, maybe 250 people. There were more cows than there were people. And making his way into the educational department, I have with me Jeremy Christensen, CEO, Executive Director of Freedom Classical Academy. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I sought you out for this podcast because I went to the orientation and you really broke down the entire story. You talked about your story of where you come from, really reaching out to the audience to show them that anything can be done no matter where you come from. You get to choose your path. And then you brought in some concepts about Aristotle and then, how you developed the standards and ethics and principles for the school. So talk to us about where you come from and when you started asking yourself these questions that made you think bigger.
Yeah, so, I moved around a little bit as a kid, but when I was 7, I lived in a very small town in northern Utah. In high school, I had to write a paper about it, so I said, head to the edge of civilization, hang a left, and go another 50 miles, and then you're there. So, but it is a ranching community called Corinne, Utah, population about 250 people, and like I said in the meeting, about 250,000 cows. It was fantastic as a little boy. Mm-hmm. Got to play in all of the old buildings and the fields and run around, but definitely, a far way away from where we are now.
Yeah. So where were you in life when you discovered Aristotle and these philosophies? And then do you remember the inner dialogue you had where you started to question what you knew?
Yeah, it was more of a gradual occurrence as opposed to a one-time event. And it occurred more and more, when I was 19, I moved to Brazil for a couple of years to serve a mission for my church. And that really helped me, again, question what I considered reality and our customs and norms in America, and really expanded my viewpoint. Honestly, growing up in that small environment, I thought that going to college or becoming a white-collar worker in any way was outside of the realm of reality for me. So it was really something I knew at some level that I could do it, but I didn't really perceive myself as the type of person to do that. I come from blue-collar stock, and I was going to continue blue-collar stock for the rest of my life. And it was really actually at my time in Brazil where that popped out to me, where I saw so many people living a variety of lifestyles. And then as I talked to other men and women who were on their missions, and they would tell me all of the plans they had when they were going to go home and what they were going to do, and I had no plan.
Okay. Wow.
And so that was the first time I really started questioning, like, hey, maybe I could do something else, and maybe I could be something more. And so on a whim, I asked my sister to apply to 3 different colleges for me, not thinking I'd get into any of them. I wasn't a bad student by any means. I got good grades and I graduated with honors. But again, just because of this mindset I had, I didn't think that college was for me or that I was the type of person that they wanted at their institutions. And so to my great surprise, I got into all of them. And so I was able to go to the college of my dreams, which was Brigham Young University. And I have to thank my sister because I had no idea how to even apply for college. I didn't know that she had to pay a fee or anything like that. She just did it all for me. And so she was a champion. And I came home from Brazil, and a week later went from summer in Brazil to winter in Utah, and with just one box that contained all of my belongings, and got to work learning. So it was a very stark transition for me.
Amazing. So when did you discover these different sets of philosophies? And
Yeah, so my introduction to education is very non-traditional. It seems to be the case in my life. where through circumstance and serendipity, I end up in unique situations. So I actually was invited from another business venture to help a startup charter school help write some of their manuals and procedures. I'm a good technical writer, and so they knew that, and they wanted to leverage that expertise to help put some policies and procedures in place for their organization. And honestly, it was a very, very small charter school that they had taken over from another school, and it had focused more on kind of like farming than anything else. So, there were some chickens running around, and our office was an old farmhouse that they had converted into an office, and they stuck me in the hall with a secretary.
Where was this at?
This was in Gilbert, Arizona.
Okay.
So they stuck me in the hall with a secretary. I had no job title, no position, and I shared a desk. So it was a very temporary situation for me. But I heard the director of the school asking the other administrators of the school for specific things over and over. And I kind of got tired of hearing him ask for it and then not getting it. So one day I just did it for him, put it on his desk. And the next year, those two other administrators were gone and I took their place. And so that was my very non-traditional introduction into school administration. But I quickly had to learn how to be a school administrator. And so I spent just an enormous amount of time researching, studying. I read the curriculum that our teachers were teaching. I've always been drawn to the notion that character is an essential part of education. And I believe, I'm going to misattribute this, but the quote is, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. I believe that was Martin Luther King that said that. But it is true that there has to be a moralistic component to education. Otherwise, we're teaching them skills and knowledge without a paradigm for application. And so that inherent, desire in me to have that component attracted me slowly to classical education, and not something I grew up with, for sure, and something I had to adapt and learn for myself. But there are, a number of websites out there that I searched, bought some books, and then ultimately was able to attend a week-long training with Hillsdale College, who is just phenomenal at doing classical education, and just slowly was able to learn these philosophies this philosophy of education.
What's the difference between modern education and classical education?
It's a great question. So modern education, it's surprising how much philosophy plays into our perception of education. And there has been an awful lot of romantic ideology that has infiltrated public education in America. And I say infiltrated because they sound really, really fun and great when we say them out loud, but in application there's no real data to support it, and they've ended up being quite destructive to our education system. And so it's through reading a lot of texts about the subject, and really there's some great classicists out there like Mortimer Adler, who wrote a series of books around the turn of the 19th century. There was a great debate in America over classical versus modern education, and Mortimer Adler and John Dewey were the two main proponents of that, and they did some debates, et cetera. I think I've got off topic of what your actual question was. Can you repeat the question again?
What's the difference between modern education and classical education?
So the difference is, again, classical education, the focus is on creating the person, helping each person be their best self, whatever that is. Classical education doesn't care if you're a mechanic, if you're a farmer, if you're a surgeon, if you're a teacher. It's agnostic as to the ends. It just wants to help each individual be their best self. Whatever you are, be the best of that. And so it's really focused on self-actualization, but self-actualization through, in most cases, external means. So the fundamental question of classical education is, what does it mean to be human? And I covered this in that family meeting, but we're all human. We all go through this human condition. And so we all feel the same emotions, and these haven't changed in thousands of years. We still have hate, anger, greed, avarice, as well as love, compassion, charity, integrity. These values are eternal. They don't change. They're an inherent part of the human condition. And so the classical education really seeks to tap into that and help us understand, is there a better way of living, or a way of living that'll help us be happier and be more humane? Mm-hmm. And that's where we get the name the humanities from, is when we study great literature, art, philosophy, all of those things, we're really just studying this condition of humanity that we're all involved in. Modern education, in contrast, has an end, and that end really, again, if you go back into the history of education, is at the Industrial Revolution, kids got kicked out of the factories eventually, which was a great thing, but now their parents were working, and they really needed a place to put these kids. And so the goal of modern education from its inception in America was, A, we need a place to babysit these kids, B, we need to prepare them for the workforce. And not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but it's a very utilitarian view of education, whereas classical education is more focused on developing the full person and helping them question the apparatuses around them. A traditional education, again, is trying to slot people into societal roles.
So I want to unpack something, because you mentioned teaching somebody how to be the best person they are. So, really kind of leaning into the human behaviors. But somewhere along throughout history, since humans have been a thing, humans don't know how to be humans. Bees know how to be bees, and birds know how to be birds, but people don't know how to be humans. Why is that? So I ask you this because you have an awful lot of knowledge about the human psychology and behavior. Why do you think that is?
I think that's inherently part of being human. Again, we have both the positive and the negative side to humanity. And so love and hate are just opposite sides of the same coin. And I think it really goes back to our ability to think and to reason. We are unique in creatures of this world in that we have the ability to think about our own thinking, to metacognate, and to change our behavior based on rational thought. A cow doesn't think about, did it live its best life yesterday?
It sure doesn't.
As far as I know. Now, I'm not interviewing any cows recently, but I imagine what they're concerned about is, where's my next meal going to come from, and what the weather is like outside. They don't think a lot beyond that, beyond their initial needs. And so, it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where most creatures stay focused on those base level of needs of shelter, food, safety. Whereas humans, we have the ability to move past those and into the higher level needs, where we're focusing on self-actualization, on those other concepts. So it really goes back to our ability to think that would separate us from everybody else.
How important is God in your life?
Very. I am a very religious person, and always have been. And so I think that definitely colors everything I do. Again, I talked about my bend towards a moralistic approach. As a public school, we definitely cannot teach religion or come anywhere close to it, but we can teach values that everybody can agree with. Again, those classical values of virtue, love, integrity, things like that again, most people are going to agree on as being positive and as being valuable to society.
Do you think the world would be different if every school had a policy where they integrated God and the Bible into the teachings?
I think so. I think part of the downside to modern education is that we removed that notion of God from schools. And I understand the conflict that inherently arises with that, of which God and which religion are we going to prefer over another. So I understand the need for separation of church and state, as it were. But I definitely believe in, if I could do the perfect education for my children, God plays a huge role in that. And I think that we would benefit in general as a society if we could include, even on a more vague level, those concepts into education.
Why do you think people resist God so heavily?
That's a great question. And, I think each person has their own reasoning and their own justification for it. How we worship God is so very different between the faiths, and people's interactions with religion is so very different. And I understand some people have had incredibly negative interactions with religions, and even, the best of intentions go awry sometimes. And so I want to be attentive to those situations, but sometimes it feels easier ultimately to resist God, and it's, in my opinion, a lie we tell ourselves.
I was going to say that's actually an oxymoron, because it's harder.
Yeah.
Life is so much harder if you resist him, if he's not with you.
Absolutely. But one of the great temptations is to walk away from your source of help, because following God takes effort. Following God takes morality, taking a stand. And so it feels like effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the moment, kind of like a diet is going to take effort, but ultimately is better for you.
Mm.
Same thing with following God. Ultimately, it's easier if we follow him, but in the short term, where so many of us are stuck, it feels easier to not follow him.
Yeah. One of my favorite scriptures is, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understandings. And there's a lot of peace that comes with that, because the truth is we don't know why. We don't know many things, and it's, quite frankly, it's not our job to. In the book of Job, it talks about God coming to him in a vision and showing him what he does. And Job is like, no, I can't. I simply can't. This is just too much. And then, apologizes for thinking that he could even play the role as God for a few moments. But I want to go back to talking about you and, building the school. So what went through your head as you were going down this journey of building the school and becoming the director, CEO, now principal? And what were some of the greatest challenges you faced during your entire journey until now?
That's a great question. So specifically as it pertains to Las Vegas, when I was a teenager, I moved to Las Vegas. So I went through CCSD here and graduated from high school here, and I have a lot of family here. But I was living in Arizona, working happily at my job in Arizona, and had a great life there. But we came to visit some family, and on a whim, my wife said, hey, let's go look at some homes. And so we started just touring some model homes for fun. No intention of moving whatsoever. And I remember we were entering one of them, and the real estate agent came up to us and said, hey, what do you do for a living? It was just being a good real estate agent, being kind to us. And my wife, out of nowhere, said, oh, my husband's going to open a charter school here. And I just looked at her and said, are you crazy? What are you talking about? And it's not that I hadn't looked into opening a school in Las Vegas before. I have a lot of love for this city, and having grown up here, appreciate a lot that it has to offer. But the last time I looked prior to that, opening a charter school in Nevada was quite difficult because of the laws in place. But she just kept telling people this. And so I thought, you know what?
She put it out into the ether.
Yeah, maybe I should look into this again. And we talked about it. And to our great surprise, the laws had been recently changed, making it more approachable to open a school in Las Vegas. So it's something that, again, we're both highly faithful people. So it's something that we prayed about and really felt it was the right choice for us. And so we began to write a charter application, which is a horrendous process that I never want to go through again.
I think you said it takes about 4 months full time to do
Yeah,
that, right?
it took about 4 months full time to get that application done. And We hit roadblock after roadblock during the process because of what the state was asking for. One of the things we had to prove was that we had community support. But when you're not in the state, when you're not in the community, it's hard to prove that you have community support. How do you get word out that you want to open a school when you're not in the community? And so on a whim, I remember calling my wife and just being so overwhelmed and frustrated with it and just saying, honey, I don't think this is possible. I don't know how I'm going to get evidence for this, and you do have to support evidence. The state's very strict on what you submit. So I just called her and was venting and just said, honey, this isn't going to be possible. I don't know how I'm going to prove this. And she said, well, I understand your frustration. Why don't you, again, pray about it, and something will happen, something will open up. And I just kind of blew her off, said, okay, whatever. And, like, why don't you figure it out then, kind of thing. Just being obnoxious and kind of snarky about it.
Yeah.
But I got off the phone with her and continued to think about it. And on a whim, I went to the City of North Las Vegas's website, and I filled out a web form for the mayor, I believe, and just, again, on a total whim. And John Lee was the mayor at the time. And to my great surprise, within an hour, somebody from the city reached back out to me. And I can't tell you how many times I filled out a web form and with no response. Half the time I'm convinced they don't go anywhere. But in this case, they actually did get back to me. And we had a good conversation. It was with a gentleman that was over the economic development part of the city. And the mayor had several education initiatives that he was pursuing.
He wanted to grow North Las Vegas.
He was very aggressive in wanting to provide educational opportunities to the citizens of North Las Vegas. And so they invited me down to go visit with the mayor and to meet him. And so I came down and walked away with a letter of recommendation from the city. And from there I was able to gather a few more recommendations and complete this horrendous application. And so just time after time, when we thought a roadblock was in our way, something opened up and we were able to go around it.
Amazing. So, that's obviously the challenge of getting the school started. Once the school was developed, what were some of the challenges you faced from school opening to today?
There's been a tremendous amount of challenges. Most recently, COVID has been a horrendous challenge, especially for North Las Vegas. North Las Vegas, growing up here, I remember too many years ago that I don't want to mention, ever since the day it's struggled with education. We live in one of the lowest performing states in the U.S., and North Las Vegas has the designation of being one of the lowest performing areas in the state. So,
Why is that?
Ultimately, I think it has to do with culture. There's a culture that supports education and a culture that doesn't support education. And so what people bring into the classroom helps define their trajectory. And I talked about it in that parent meeting where the students have to come with a desire to learn. And so if the student's not coming with a desire to learn, in addition to, there's also resources at home that play a big part of this. And so economically, North Las Vegas is different than other parts of the state. But all those things come together to really influence how much a student is going to learn. So if they come to school with this idea of, this is just something annoying I have to do, and I just have to survive it, that attitude is going to be completely different, and what they get out of it is going to be completely different than a kid who comes from a family that highly values education, is constantly reinforcing the need to study and work hard, and then provides that support at home. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say those people don't exist in North Las Vegas, because we have some absolutely phenomenal families, but it does exist at a lower rate than other parts of the state.
Yeah. How interesting that you built a school in one of the most challenging cities in the U.S.
Yeah, if I had to do it over again, I'm not sure I'd go through the hassle again, but it is rewarding, and it has been a very good learning experience for me. But we did go in with that desire knowing that there was a strong need in North Las Vegas and wanting to make a difference. That's always been an important part of my career, wanting to not only, yes, I want to be able to provide for my family, but I want to feel like I'm making a difference of some sort in the process. And those aren't two mutually exclusive goals. You know, they can both happen simultaneously. And so knowing that we were going to an area where it was going to be a little bit rougher excited me.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. Now, again, looking back, did I know exactly what I was getting myself into? No. And it's been a lot more challenging than I could have foreseen. But we've also just met some amazing people and been able to influence a lot of lives. And so hopefully we can continue to do that for a long time.
Some of the greatest opportunities are found in the greatest challenges.
Absolutely.
It really does mold us into the next version of ourselves. I think a lot of people are afraid of adversity because then you have to ask yourself tough questions. And people are afraid of adversity, but it's like working out. You know, the first, second, and third workout, you don't really see the muscle growth first. First your muscles tear, and then they heal, and then you slowly become stronger.
Yeah. Sometimes the scariest fixture in our house is the mirror. And
That is good.
so,
That's a soundbite right there.
and so especially when we're looking at our metaphorical mirror, you know, our souls taking the opportunity to reflect. And, you know, you mentioned some Bible references earlier, so I'll mention one. Sometimes we're like Jonah in the well, where we don't want to go teach in Nineveh, we want to run away. But you know, we have a calling, we have a purpose. And when we go and pursue that purpose, we actually find success. But it doesn't mean it's easy to do it in the process. Mm-hmm. But like you said, there is growth in the process. And hopefully I'm growing along with it. I'm striving.
I had a call with my life coach today, and it was probably one of the most astounding and transformative calls. And not that the others haven't. I've been with her for about 2 years, but this one was surprisingly, it was painful and it was invigorating at the same time because, so I try to be in God's Word every night before I go to bed just to end the day proper in faith. I try to end the day in faith. And, you know, before I read the Bible, I asked him to just, you know, guide me to hear him. And so, you know, when you knock on God's door, he will answer, but you have to intentionally knock. So he leads me to Revelations chapter 3, verse 20, where it talks about being lukewarm. And I've been lukewarm for so long because I know what to do, but I don't do what I know because of fear. But then, you know, God does say, be zealous and repent. Basically saying, just be energetic and ask to be better the next day, and it will happen. Talks about knocking on his door and he will answer. But, you know, it's interesting because, like, I don't intentionally pray every time, but when I do, man, do I get some great answers.
Yeah, to me, that scripture is one of the scariest because you have to self-reflect and say, am I lukewarm? Am I hot? Am I cold? Or am I lukewarm? And so often it's easy to slip into that lukewarm instead of being zealous in our faith. Yeah, that's a good reflection to have.
Yeah, I think a lot of the answers are in the Bible. I think the Bible is probably the best manual for life. It's the manual on how to raise kids, I think, but, you know, oftentimes people don't want to open it up because there's so much truth and jest in it. But that's okay. I think most people come with it in time. And I tell this to a lot of people. I coach some women on sales, and I do tell them, and I've integrated God into the coaching, and I tell them, like, the thing you have to understand is if you're not part of the solution, you're by default part of the problem. Healed people heal people, and hurt people hurt people. So which one do you want to be? It is your duty to be great and to pass that on to the next people, to the next person, to just, it's like having, taking a clean cup of water and dumping that clean water into a bucket of where there's some dirty water at the bottom. You're going to end up with diluted dirty water.
Yeah.
So we got to get rid of that dirt.
Yeah. that process can be pretty difficult sometimes.
It can.
But that's why we needed a Savior. That's why the atonement exists, for us to learn, to grow, to repent, and to receive that grace.
Love that. Okay, now I know that you mentioned during the orientation that the school cost about $22 million and you had to work on getting the funding. So how did you do that?
We were very blessed to work with a great facility development company. That's all they do is they go out and they secure funding for the development of the facilities, and included in that are some of the startup costs. We were also very, very fortunate that we applied for and received a charter startup grant through the federal government. So we got nearly $800,000 in startup grant funds through them. And we were, again, felt very blessed because we were one of 2 schools that got the maximum amount allowable under the grant in Nevada. And that definitely helped us get started. And those charter development companies, they do make money in the end, but they do just an invaluable service. Because I don't know how you could open up a charter school without just massive amounts of funding, and they really came through for us.
All right, Jeremy, I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
All right.
I'm going to blindside you. No pressure. So, where do you see yourself in 5 years, and how will that impact the lives of other people?
Good question. That's a question I ask myself often. I see myself right here in Las Vegas. It is our goal to open up additional campus or campuses. I don't ever want to become a huge organization because I believe that there's a reverse correlation between how big you get and how effective you can be in your mission. But I still feel like we could bless more lives, we can make a bigger difference. And so, I do want to grow the organization. And, I have 5 kids myself, who are 3 of them are at the school, 2 of them are at high school. And so we don't intend on going anywhere until at least our youngest is graduated, so that he has that continuity of education.
Very nice. Knowing what you know now, what would you go back and tell your 20-year-old self?
Wow, that is a great question. To tell myself a few things. One, most important, trust the Lord. He has a plan, and try to figure out what that plan is and follow it. And 2, buckle up. Life is crazy. Just roll with the punches, and put your head down. Go to work, and trust that everything will work out.
What do you think happens when God calls you but you don't answer the call?
Well, at minimum, missed opportunities. I think God's always calling us one way or another. And if we can hear those calls and respond to them, then a world of opportunity opens up for us. And I definitely wouldn't be where I am today without answering some of those calls. But I'm sure I've missed some too. And so I think ultimately it is those missed opportunities, both for personal growth and for maybe career. You never really know.
We don't have to name those missed opportunities, but why do you think you missed them?
Oh, because I'm human. Sometimes I'm lazy. Like I mentioned Jonah in the well before. Sometimes Jonah was called to Nineveh to preach the gospel, and he said, those people in Nineveh are heathens. They're going to kill me. I don't want to go teach them. I'm heavily summarizing here, but he didn't want to go, so he tried to escape, and then the Lord caught up to him on a ship, and the story. He got cast over and swallowed up by a whale, and eventually said, I got to do this, and went to Nineveh and was successful ultimately. But sometimes, again, our preconceived notions of what is and isn't possible definitely limit our possibilities. So I talked in the meeting about the difference between freedom and liberty, that idea of being able to think clearly for oneself and eliminate some of the mental prisons we create for ourselves. That is true freedom. And so trying to get there is the object of a classical education.
I do remember that slideshow. That was a good speech. You know, you are going to get a fourth question.
Go ahead.
Only 3 people ever have gotten 4 questions. But third question is, everyone talks about filling up their cup. No one ever talks about what's in that cup, though. So you fill up and then you pour out and you give to people. We ultimately fill up our cup every day. What do you want to pour out of that cup?
What I want to pour out of that cup is hope and love. You know, when I was in Brazil, I remember going to some of the richest homes I've ever been in, as well as some of the poorest homes I've ever been in, and sometimes right next to each other. And so that contrast between the haves and the have-nots was just so stark. But I remember I was in one area, and we walked everywhere we went, and so I got very adept at walking. But I remember being in a very poor area, and there's this huge wall going down a hill, and on that wall somebody had graffitied, hope is the last thing to die. And I feel like that just really resonated with me, that some of the happiest people I ever met were living in shanties over mud, you know, that you could see through their floorboards down to the mud. They had no plumbing, they had no anything, but they were just absolutely the happiest people you could meet, and so happy to share what little they did have. And I think that goes back to hope, and being able to have that faith that good is coming your way somewhere down the road. And if you just keep working towards it, there's going to be a happy result.
Hope and love. That's good content. That's good. That was really good. I'm just taking that one in. Fourth question.
All right.
My favorite question. What are you grateful for?
What am I grateful for? Well, first, faith. Second, family. You know, I wouldn't be where I am without just a phenomenal wife by my side. She is my intellectual superior in so many ways, and she challenges me, and I love that she can call me on my BS sometimes, and let me know that I'm being a baby or whatever it is.
She makes you face yourself?
Yeah, she makes me face myself. And she makes me grow. So she's never let me be content with who I am. You know, a great friend I have once said there's no comfort in the growth zone, but there's no growth in the comfort zone. And staying uncomfortable is kind of the secret to life. Always pushing yourself to learn a little bit more, do something a little bit different. And she has been just a huge part of that in forcing me sometimes to stop whining and get to work.
Would you say after this entire experience with building and developing and running a school that you've learned to have a different relationship with pain?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different types of pain you can go through. And for me, again, growing up in that blue-collar mindset, I love having a task list and being able to complete a job and just check it off. But as a school leader, most of my tasks are long-term tasks, and they're second and third order effects. So I can influence which teachers are at the school, but I can't, I'm not teaching students individually. So if we're succeeding academically, that's a few orders away from me. And so I try to control what I can, and learning to deal with not having an immediate effect on my surroundings has been very difficult for me. It's been a type of pain for me. And when I started, I also did not like giving up control. I didn't like delegating. And, when I started this job, I had no gray hair. So in 8 years, I've started graying quite profusely.
Wisdom hair.
Yes. And so it was a very, very rough education for me, that first year of operation, to learn that I couldn't do everything myself, and that if I couldn't trust anybody to do their jobs, that I was going to put myself in an early grave. And so I had to learn to surround myself with great people and to give them trust and, encourage them and support them where I can. But ultimately, the school is where it is because I have great people around me. And my job is just to empower them and to help set the course for the school.
A rising tide raises all the boats.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your experience and your story, because a lot of people are always wondering how to get past their challenges and become that next level of themselves. So thank you so much for coming on the show and again talking to us about your overall story.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
It's been a pleasure.